I would like to invite you to come on a journey with me. In reality, perhaps prosperity is a bit of a red herring. It seems to me that we get caught up in thinking that I haven't got any money, or perhaps I'm not living the life that I want, or perhaps I'm not doing the work that I want, or I'm doing work but it really doesn't fulfill me. And we get caught up in this idea that prosperity is something that we need to gain, and that in order to be prosperous, we have to learn something and we have to do things differently. And I think that's true. That is true in the sense that there are many things that all of us do from day to day, week to week, that stifle our prosperity. But at the same time, if we've really grasped what it is, it turns out that it's not about doing more or doing things differently or doing things better, because all of those beliefs buy into this idea that we're not doing enough, we're not good enough, there isn't enough, that there is an external journey to go on in order to reach the destination that is prosperity. So I'd like to turn it on its head and define prosperity in the way that I've come to understand it myself, through my own hard-won experience. There is no way that I'm putting myself on a pedestal and saying, hey, I'm a teacher of prosperity because, I'm mega rich, and I'm going to teach you how I got there. I see it as a journey that I'm on, and that as I've gone along, there have been these signposts, these flags that have told me how to be different. And I couldn't have done that if I hadn't had teachers both in person and in text. If I hadn't had those signposts in my life, then I would have still been rattling on, trying to do more, be better, trying to achieve more, and feeling like I was falling short because I didn't have the money in my account or the work that I wanted. So I'm not a teacher in the sense of a guru or somebody who's better than, got any kind of extraordinary wisdom to impart. What I have is my own experience. What I want to share with you is my own experience. And as such, I encourage you to keep me, and preferably anybody else, keep us off any kind of pedestal. Say to yourself now, I am my own teacher. I am my own teacher. There is no knowledge that I can acquire that tells me anything about myself. All the knowledge that we need, everything that we might possibly need to know, exists within us. The key to accessing that knowledge is spirituality, is the spiritual path. And I'd like to couch that in the sense of, clearly it's important for me to say I'm not talking about a religiosity, I'm not talking about scripture and an institution-based pathway of the spirit. I'm talking about spirituality in the sense that we can't touch it. It's not material enough for us to touch. It's a state of being or a state of consciousness, a state of love, a centering in the heart, a being in the heart, and allowing any action that we take in life to come born out of that stillness. So that's intangible. It's not scientific. It's not. You can't nail it down. That's what I'm talking about when I say spiritual. And I hear a lot of people saying that spirituality and money don't mix. And I feel that it's really important that we do away with these ideas of boundaries between the spiritual and the material. They're simply different states of being. So if we think about the various forms of H2O, you've got ice and water and gas, steam. They're all H2O, but they exist in different forms. And so what we're talking about when we talk about spiritual matters, we're talking perhaps about the steam. And then when we think we're talking about material matters, we're talking about the ice, but it's the same thing. And so when we're talking about prosperity in terms of money, in terms of like the green stuff, it's important to understand that all matters are physical and material as they are spiritual, and vice versa. So when we're talking about what we can bring into matter, what matters to us enough to bring it into form, we're talking about the physical manifestation of our spiritual self and our desires. The filter that spiritual desire passes through from our imagination into our physical reality is the mind and our thoughts. So that when we imagine what we might like to manifest, when we dream or vision, we draw that down from wherever it is, out in the ether or deep within us. We draw it through our thoughts, and then the extent to which it emerges out the other side of the thoughts depends upon the quality of the thought itself. So I feel like I've perhaps gone a little bit esoteric because I want this spiritual prosperity class to be practical. What practical actions do we take? But I also felt it important to set out my stall. I am a spiritual teacher and I do want to approach this from a spiritual angle. If spirituality, the very term spirituality, turns you right off, then until you can stomach it, then this isn't for you. These classes are for people who have a certain amount of spiritual awareness, but perhaps are feeling stuck in their ability to bring all their spiritual knowledge and experience, bring it to bear in the physical realm. I want to take a particular standpoint on prosperity, and that is that prosperity is one end of a spectrum, and at the other end of the spectrum is poverty. So prosperity consciousness is one state of being, and its alter ego, its nemesis, is poverty consciousness. And there are certain belief systems, certain ways of thinking that characterise and reinforce poverty consciousness, and there are certain ways of thinking that characterise and bring about prosperity consciousness. So the 6 sessions that I intend to run around prosperity are really going to be focused on the various attachments that we might have to poverty consciousness. Because it is my belief, and this is something that I will be stating and reinstating over and over if I can, is that our natural state is abundance. There is nothing that we need to acquire from outside of ourselves to unlock our natural prosperity. And that is a belief that I hold. I don't expect you to take what I say unchallenged, unprocessed. Like I say, you are your own teacher, you are your own guru. I offer you my interpretation, my experience, and you need to sit with how does that resonate with you. But that's the first thing that I'm going to posit as part of this prosperity course, that prosperity is our natural state, abundance is our natural state, and it is in the remembering of that we come into our prosperity consciousness. So it's not an achievement as in an external, we don't acquire it externally. It's not about doing more, it's about letting go. And what do we need to let go of? We need to let go of our attachment to poverty. And if it was as clear-cut and as easy as for me to say to you, let go of your attachment to poverty and you'll be prosperous, and the intellectual mind could handle that we could think our way out of poverty consciousness, then not only would I be doing myself out of a job, I'd be lying to you. Because this is a lifetime's work, an absolute lifetime's work. And if I can use that metaphor of the spectrum, almost like there's a sliding scale along that, maybe we're 90% prosperous and 10% poverty. Maybe we're 50-50, maybe we're 60-40. At any given time, we're going to be more prosperous than poverty, or more poverty-stricken than prosperous. And if we can identify what the draw is into poverty, and we can start to release and heal those various attachments to poverty, then we free ourselves to be prosperous, prosperous being our natural state. So there are certain qualities that characterise somebody with poverty consciousness, and I'm telling you this now, it has nothing to do with someone's bank account. There can be people, I think about, there must be people who live in what the Western world, the developed world, might say is abstract poverty, in slums, living on rubbish, scraping a living. But that person may well be deeply happy within themselves. They may look around at their rubbish heap that they're living on and see nothing but abundance because it provides for them. And they may have a happy family, and they may well feel very satisfied within themselves. I'm not saying that's true for everybody who lives on rubbish tips, but it's possible that somebody who has next to nothing materially can be very spiritually happy. At the same time, you get people who might have millions and millions and millions in the bank, but they live in a state of fear, they don't spend, they are in chaos around money. And just because they've got a big bank account, it doesn't mean that they are rich. So I think it's important for us to break the attachment that we have to determining our prosperity according to our bank account. I'm somebody who in my youth, I say in my youth, in my 20s, I earned a lot of money. I did so in a salaried position. I earned a good salary. I was self-employed. I earned a heck of a lot of money. Now, in my life, after a couple of years of working through my prosperity issues, I'm coming back into my wealth. Money is starting to come into my life, but nowhere near to the extent that it has done in the past. But I would say this, I say this with confidence, that I am as prosperous now as I've ever been. I am more prosperous now than I've ever been, because I can identify with the millionaire sitting there frightened of money. That's been the truth for me in the past. When money came in the past, I felt a lot of fear that my responsibility to manage it, and I ended up spending everything and more and falling into debt. So when I got into debt and I got into real serious financial difficulties, which brought me to my knees, I had to then start learning afresh what it means to be really prosperous. And 3 years of study and self-exploration and healing has brought me to this point now. So I want to share that from my heart, that I feel more prosperous now than I ever have done. Does my bank account reflect where I've been? No. But it comes from a certain sense of being completely centred and completely at peace with myself, and my ability to calmly and in a detached manner deal with what life brings to me. So I'm going to explore in the 6 sessions, I'm going to explore our attachment to poverty. I see poverty like an addiction. I realise now, I started to say, way back before I went off on a tangent, I started to say that that if it was sufficient to know that poverty consciousness was the enemy of prosperity, then we simply would just drop any attachment we have to poverty and move on. But it's more tenacious and persistent than that, and that's where I was coming to with the idea that poverty is a form of an addiction. And when I say an addiction, I would go as far as to say an illness, a dis-ease, certainly a a spiritual schism within the self, and that poverty, although it doesn't sound like a very attractive proposition, and one might assume that you get addicted to things that make you feel better. Why does poverty make me feel better? Why would I be addicted to that? But there are so many things that are attractive about being poor. And for the record, I would draw the distinction between being poor and being broke. There are times in our lives, all of us will experience times when we don't have enough money, and we can say, hand on heart, I'm broke, and know that it's a temporary situation. Money is tidal for everybody. It comes, it goes, it ebbs, it flows, and there are times in our lives when we are broke. And I personally believe it's okay to say that. That's a different thing to being poor, because being poor is not about how much money's in our purse. It's an all-pervading state of being. And there are certain belief systems that go hand in hand with poverty, and the extent to which we release those belief systems correlates to the extent to which we can embrace our natural state of prosperity. And so I'm going to be quite hard about it. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There are certain beliefs that we all hold on to that are the absolute enemy of prosperity. One is, I am a victim. That life has been shit, and bad things happen to me, and people make my life worse, and you get what I'm saying, that the external factors have the power to affect my internal state. And if only other people, or the economy, or anything, if only that would change, then I would be happy. That's one part of being a victim. But secondly, there's also the poor me element of it. We every single one of us enjoys to a certain extent people's pity. And our story that we tell about ourselves and how hard it's been for us and poor me is a big part of the trap of poverty, because it's so pernicious, it's so attractive, it's so validating to have a story that explains away why we're not perfect, because we're so frightened of not being perfect that we have to justify why we're not perfect. So this bad thing happened, that bad thing happened, So that's one of the things that we're going to cover in this 6-week course, is letting go of everything that goes around being a victim. And that includes resentments and our inability to forgive, and the feeling like bad stuff's happened to us. I'm not telling you that bad stuff hasn't happened to you. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one of these people who says, the victim brought it upon themselves. I don't mean that. I mean that unless somebody is abusing you here and now, right now, then it is your thoughts that are punishing and hurting you about the abuse that took place. So I'm not saying you need to take responsibility for what happened in terms of what somebody else did to you, but I'm saying that if you really want to be prosperous, if you really want to be well, if you really want to embrace everything that you can be, there is a journey to go on about accepting that how we think about what's happened to us, how we deal with what's happened to us, and what we choose to think about in the here and now, that is very much our responsibility and very much within our control. Now this will challenge a lot of people. I don't expect hate mail, but at the same time I realise that this is a deep truth that fundamentally unsettles any human being. And the reason I know how painful that journey is because I've been there, I've done it, I'm still going through it. There are days in which I feel like I'm living in perfect forgiveness of everything, and there are days in which I'm riddled with resentment. It's almost as if forgiveness is a state that is granted to me by, whether we say God or higher power or great spirit, whatever word works for you. Forgiveness is a state that is granted to me through spiritual practice. It is not something that I do. Big part of the teaching. Another attachment, a poverty attachment, would be a fear of change. Somebody who has a poverty consciousness cannot and will not change. Somebody who has a prosperity consciousness doesn't need to change because they are at one with and at peace with the eternal flux and ebb and flow of life. So change is inevitable. Their change and growth is inevitable. They evolve and grow without having to think about it. They are in a well-balanced patter with the ebb and flow of life. So they don't fear change because change is not something that they do. Change is a state that just is. And all of us, on any given day, can be at different places along that spectrum. Another attachment to poverty comes in the form of I mustn't affect or change the status quo. The status quo, which has kept me safe, kept me fed, kept me watered, kept me sheltered all these years, the family tribal dynamic. I'm frightened to break out of that. I'm frightened that I'm not loved, I'm frightened that I'm not accepted, and I'm frightened that I will be excluded. And then at the other end, somebody who has prosperity consciousness is absolutely okay with who they are. And they are willing to say to anybody, I am that I am. I am flawed, but I am perfectly flawed. I'm learning, I'm growing, I'm human, but I'm okay. And they believe it. Self-love, self-worth. And so I'm going to bring this little introduction to an end here, or else I'm giving away all my prosperity secrets in one go. But I think that's a good place for me to start to curtail it. It boils down to this. It boils down to self-worth. It boils down to self-love. It's about recognising that we are responsible and have control and power over our responses to life. The more able we are to distance ourselves from the dramas of life, the stories that we tell, the scripts that we run, the more distance we put between us and it, the more serene, calm, and able to respond we are. When we have that ability to respond, we start to be able to choose our thoughts. When we choose our thoughts, we start to genuinely create our reality. When we can choose our thoughts, we're not just choosing how we react, we're choosing what we would like to project into our environment and into our future. This process comes from deciding, not in the head, but deciding at a soul level, at a spiritual level, that this path I'm on of poverty does not serve me, does not serve others, and does not serve what I might call God. When we decide that and we decide we'd like to change, we've taken a huge step away from the poverty end of the spectrum towards prosperity. So just by the very fact that you would consider joining a prosperity class, just the very fact that you'd be willing to listen to someone talk from their own experience about prosperity, has said and sent a ripple out into the universe that says, hey, I am ready to think differently about myself. I'm ready to take responsibility for myself, and I'm willing to let go and forgive and release all that around me that hurts me and no longer serves me. So, hey, this is your first step. You may have, for all I know, I could be talking to people who have been studying prosperity for many more years than me. So I reiterate, I'm not coming at this from a guru point of view. I'm coming at this from a personal experience point of view, but we are all on this path together. And it is my belief that the future of the human race, the future of civilization, the future of this planet is based upon this awareness, this growing state of consciousness that is about self-responsibility. So I do believe in these teachings, and I do believe in this work. I believe it is all our responsibility to go within and start to look at where are we stuck in order to create change in the external world. So I want to thank you for joining me. I want to thank you for taking an interest. And if you think what I've said rings a bell, if you'd like to know more, if you'd like to explore various ways and means of starting to make the shift from poverty into prosperity, then do get in touch and join me. It'll be Monday evenings on Skype. If you get in touch either via Facebook or email, it's alexandrajwilson@yahoo.co.uk, or you can find me on Facebook. My business name is Pilgrim Voice. It would be wonderful to connect with you, wonderful to listen to you, and it's with great joy and a huge sense of excitement that I send this out into the universe. Thank you very much, and I'll see you soon.